In August 1944, the highways and byways of France became the stage for a logistics undertaking of extraordinary scale, reshaping the understanding of military supply operations for generations. Following the breakout from the Normandy beachhead, American forces surged across the French countryside with a speed that outstripped the capacity of conventional supply networks. What emerged in response was an urgent and improvisational logistical solution that ultimately became one of the most efficient and renowned supply efforts in military history. Known as the Red Ball Express, this operation showcased the full extent of American industrial output, moving vast quantities of equipment and provisions in a manner German commanders had previously deemed unattainable. For the retreating Wehrmacht, the endless columns of trucks crisscrossing the French roads day and night symbolized a kind of military power that was effectively unstoppable. This episode demonstrated that success on the modern battlefield relied not only on tactical maneuvers but also on the effective orchestration of production and transportation. The calculations of Allied victory were being conducted not merely in war plans, but through metrics of industrial throughput and logistical innovation. The logistical challenges began on June 6, 1944, when Allied forces launched their massive amphibious assault on Normandy. Over 156,000 soldiers stormed 5 beaches, supported by an armada of nearly 7,000 ships and landing craft. Operation Overlord demanded not only the movement of troops, but the transport of unprecedented volumes of military vehicles, weapons, and supplies. By the end of June, Allied personnel had offloaded approximately 170,000 vehicles via the artificial Mulberry harbors and directly onto the beaches. These temporary ports, constructed in England and towed across the Channel, were capable of handling supplies at rates that rivaled or exceeded those of established European ports. By late June, the 2 Mulberries had facilitated the delivery of roughly 7.5 million gallons of fuel and 500,000 tons of essential material. Despite this massive logistical effort, advancing beyond Normandy proved slower and more arduous than planners had anticipated. For 7 weeks after D-Day, Allied troops remained confined to a beachhead that measured only about 50 miles wide and 20 miles deep. German forces skillfully exploited the hedgerow terrain, transforming the region into a defensive labyrinth that produced grueling, attritional combat reminiscent of World War I. The launch of Operation Cobra on July 25, 1900. A coordinated aerial bombardment softened enemy lines, enabling American infantry and armored units to break through and move into the open terrain of northern France. The pace of this advance caught even Allied commanders by surprise. With the Third Army under General George Patton becoming fully operational on August 1, 1944, a series of rapid movements across France ensued. Patton's formations frequently advanced 50 to 75 miles per week, with some operations covering as much as 80 miles in just 7 days. By mid-August, units of the Third Army had reached the Seine River, more than 150 miles from the Normandy beaches. This rapid operational success, however, exposed a severe logistical vulnerability. Allied bombing campaigns, which had previously isolated Normandy and prevented German reinforcements, had also crippled the French railway network. Rail transport, long the backbone of military supply in Europe, was largely unusable. The daily supply demands of frontline units were immense. Each division required roughly 700 to 750 tons of fuel, ammunition, and other provisions every day. With 28 divisions moving across France by late August, the total daily requirement exceeded 20,000 tons, while Patton's armored units alone consumed approximately 400,000 gallons of gasoline daily. The critical challenge lay in distance. Trucks transporting supplies from Normandy to forward units had to complete round trips that grew longer as the front moved east. A truck delivering supplies 200 miles from the beachhead required over 50 hours to complete a single circuit, whereas the same vehicle could manage 2 round trips per day if the destination was only 50 miles away. By August 20, 1944, shortages of fuel and ammunition had reached a crisis point, threatening to bring the offensive to a standstill. Frontline units were running perilously low on essential supplies even as German forces retreated ahead of them. The rapid advances of August, initially a hallmark of Allied success, were at risk of grinding to a halt not due to enemy resistance, but because supply convoys could not sustain the pace. The Red Ball Express thus emerged as an urgent and adaptive response to this logistical bottleneck. Utilizing thousands of trucks, a largely African-American workforce, and round-the-clock operations, it provided a continuous lifeline to the advancing armies, ensuring that the momentum of the campaign could be maintained. The operation exemplified the increasing importance of industrial capacity, transportation management, and supply chain innovation in modern warfare, a lesson that would resonate far beyond the fields of France in 1944. In a relentless 36-hour strategic session starting on August 23, transportation officers faced the urgent task of resolving a major logistical challenge. Their solution would become a historic example of military supply ingenuity, the creation of dedicated high-speed supply routes. Tie-in of dedicated high-speed supply routes. These routes consisted of parallel one-way highways reserved solely for military convoys, operating non-stop around the clock. This ambitious system was later named the Red Ball Express, a title inspired by American railroad traditions of the late 19th century. Around 1892, the Santa Fe Railroad had marked freight cars carrying perishable goods with red balls, signaling that these shipments were a priority and deserved precedence over all other trains. The term Red Ball became widely recognized within the railroad industry as shorthand for urgent or express deliveries. During the preparations for the D-Day invasion, British logistics officers had applied the term Red Ball Express to the rapid movement of supplies to southern ports. U.S. transportation planners borrowed this name for their own large-scale supply network. Colonel Loren Albert Ives was tasked with organizing the operation. Nicknamed Little Patton by those under his command for his assertive and direct leadership, Ives confronted the enormous challenge of assembling a workforce and fleet capable of sustaining continuous operations on a scale never attempted before. The endeavor required roughly 6,000 trucks, 12,000 drivers operating in two-person crews, along with mechanics to maintain the vehicles, traffic coordinators, and a carefully managed route system designed to prevent congestion and keep supplies flowing without interruption. Fortunately, trucks were readily obtainable. General Motors had produced 562,000 CCKW trucks between 1941 and 1945, making the 21 2-ton GMC model second only to the Jeep in terms of prevalence among American military vehicles. Soldiers nicknamed these trucks Jimmies or Deuce and a Half. Each featured a 6-wheel drive configuration, a 276 cubic inch GMC engine generating 91 horsepower, and a Warner 5-speed transmission with overdrive. Their carrying capacity reached 21 2-tons off-road and up to 5 tons on improved roadways. A major advantage of the CCKW fleet lay in its complete standardization. Every truck was identical, built to uniform specifications using interchangeable parts. Mechanics could service any vehicle without needing specialized training, and drivers could operate any truck without additional instruction. This uniformity ensured spare parts were universally compatible, simplifying maintenance and repair operations. By contrast, German logistics struggled under far less standardized conditions. At the start of the war, the German military employed over 150 different truck models, each requiring unique components, specialized mechanics, and individualized maintenance procedures. This fragmentation often left German units immobilized, with vehicles out of service while waiting for parts that were sometimes impossible to obtain due to factory closures or production changes. Recruiting drivers proved far more difficult than acquiring trucks. Colonel Ives needed 23,000 personnel capable of driving under arduous conditions for prolonged periods, reflecting the segregated nature of the U.S. military. In the 1942nd, approximately 3/4 of the Red Ball Express drivers were African American soldiers. At that time, African American service members were generally excluded from frontline combat roles and instead assigned to support and service functions. This included the Quartermaster and Transportation Corps units, which were disproportionately staffed by black enlisted men who undertook the demanding yet crucial task of transporting supplies efficiently and reliably. The successful implementation of the Red Ball Express relied on this combination of standardized vehicles, an extensive network of drivers and support staff, and meticulously planned continuous operations. Its creation exemplified both the industrial strength of the United States and the often overlooked contributions of African American soldiers in sustaining one of the most critical supply lines of World War II. During World War II, a group of soldiers faced exclusion from combat roles not because of skill or courage, but solely due to the color of their skin. Despite this discrimination both at home and within the military, they demonstrated extraordinary resilience and proved their ability to handle challenges as intense as those encountered on the front lines. Among these troops, known as the Red Ball Express drivers, most were younger than 24 and many had never operated large trucks before being drafted. They hailed from every corner of the United States, from bustling city neighborhoods to isolated rural farms, united by a shared determination to support the war effort in any way they could. Operations for the Red Ball Express commenced on August 25, 1944. On that first day, 67 truck companies mobilized a fleet of 3,558 vehicles, transporting a total of 4,482 tons of essential supplies. The initial supply route stretched roughly 125 miles from Saint-Lô to Chartres. Within just 4 days, the program expanded dramatically. 132 truck companies were now operating nearly 6,000 trucks, establishing a continuous flow of logistics unlike anything previously attempted in military history. To manage this unprecedented operation, 2 parallel highways were designated exclusively for military use between Normandy and forward supply depots. The northern route was assigned to trucks carrying loaded supplies toward the advancing front, while the southern route facilitated the return of empty vehicles to Normandy for reloading. Civilian vehicles were strictly barred from these corridors, and even military vehicles not assigned to the Red Ball convoys were prohibited from using them. At every major junction along the routes, checkpoints staffed by military police ensured orderly movement. The 793rd Military Police Battalion oversaw convoy tracking, provided guidance to drivers, enforced priority access, and maintained operational discipline. Their unit insignia, a pair of red circles on a diagonal yellow stripe set against a green background, honored their role in supporting the Red Ball Express. Likewise, each truck was marked with red circles on the sides and front grille, along with additional identifiers signaling convoy position, unit affiliation, and cargo type. These visual codes enable controllers to monitor and direct traffic efficiently, often without halting the convoys for inspection. The operational demands on Red Ball drivers were intense. Regulations dictated that convoys consist of at least 5 trucks spaced 60 feet apart, moving at roughly 25 miles, with Jeep escorts positioned ahead and behind. Drivers were instructed to pause for 10-minute rest breaks every hour, and nighttime travel relied on cat-eye blackout lights that offered minimal visibility while minimizing detection from enemy aircraft. However, in practice, the urgency of the mission frequently overrode these rules. Trucks often departed Cherbourg immediately after loading, without waiting for full convoy formations. Engine governors were commonly disabled to allow higher speeds, with many vehicles exceeding 60 mph on long stretches despite a 45 mph limit. Drivers sometimes skipped scheduled rest periods if they felt capable of continuing. The relentless need to maintain a steady flow of supplies meant that personal safety and vehicle regulations were often sacrificed to achieve the operational goal. The Red Ball Express became a remarkable example of disciplined improvisation, where young soldiers facing both racial discrimination and extreme logistical challenges kept the front line supplied in one of the most ambitious military transport efforts in history. Their determination and adaptability ensured that vital resources reached combat units without interruption, proving their effectiveness under circumstances that tested both men and machines to the absolute limit. The journey from Cherbourg to Chartres and back spanned roughly 250 miles and officially took 54 hours to complete. Drivers operated in pairs, taking turns behind the wheel while the other rested in the cab. On paper, this rotation ensured each driver could recuperate, but in practice, unpredictable road conditions, vehicle malfunctions, and operational pressures meant many drivers went for days with very little sleep. Private James Rucard, a 19-year-old truck operator from Maple Heights, Ohio, later recounted his experiences in interviews preserved by the Veterans History Project. He described highways littered with the bodies of both men and horses following aerial bombardments. "I was frightened, but I kept driving, hoping everything would turn out all right. Being young and thousands of miles from home, anyone would feel the same," he recalled. The physical strain was relentless. Roads ravaged by combat and severe weather made driving exceptionally hazardous. Striking potholes at high speeds hurled drivers against the interior of their cabs, while tire failures were a constant threat, forcing rapid roadside repairs to keep convoys on schedule. Mud became one of the most persistent obstacles, transforming unpaved stretches into sticky traps that immobilized vehicles and slowed entire convoys. Washington Rector, a member of the 3916th Quartermaster Truck Company, later reflected on the racial discrimination that persisted even amid this critical operation. He noted, "We were expected to accept segregation." Interaction with white drivers was discouraged because it was feared that problems could arise. One veteran remembered a tense incident in which a black unit attempted to overtake a white convoy. White drivers deliberately maneuvered their trucks to block the passing, creating a perilous game of chicken on roads where speed was essential. Despite exhaustion, discrimination, and the ever-present dangers, Red Ball Express drivers sustained operations that were vital for the Allied advance. On August 29, 1944, the system achieved its peak efficiency. 5,938 trucks transported 12,342 tons of supplies in a single day. To put this in perspective, this output exceeded what the German military could move through all means trucks, rail, and horse-drawn transport combined on its most productive day in France. At any moment during operations, roughly 900 trucks were active on the roads. About 2,000 vehicles traveled loaded toward the front lines. Another 2,000 returned empty to Normandy, and the remaining trucks were engaged in loading, unloading, refueling, or undergoing repairs. Altogether, the Red Ball Express managed over 6,000 vehicle movements daily while maintaining uninterrupted supply lines to the front. Operating the Red Ball Express demanded enormous resources. 6,000 trucks alone consumed around 2 million gallons of fuel per month just to run, excluding the gasoline transported for combat units. Continuous high-speed travel on damaged roads wore out roughly 50,000 tires over the 83-day operation. Maintenance requirements meant that about 10% of the fleet was temporarily out of service at any given time. The logistical backbone of the operation included strategically placed refueling stations, repair depots, and traffic control posts along the entire route. Repair teams had to be ready to respond immediately to breakdowns, while spare parts were distributed in advance to ensure minimal disruption. All of this mechanical coordination functioned seamlessly as trucks continued moving supplies to combat units without pause. For German forces attempting to stem the Allied advance, the efficiency of American logistics presented an unprecedented challenge. Traditional German defensive strategies assumed that advancing armies would eventually exhaust their supply lines, creating temporary vulnerabilities that defenders could exploit. In 1944, German logistics remained heavily dependent on horse-drawn transport. Germany had mobilized approximately 2.75 million horses at the war's outset, and reliance on equine transport actually intensified as the conflict progressed. The Red Ball Express eliminated the logistical pauses that German commanders had hoped to exploit, allowing Allied forces to maintain unrelenting momentum. During 1944, German military operations in France faced severe logistical constraints due to the limited availability of motorized vehicles. Losses on the battlefield outstripped Germany's capacity to replace trucks, forcing divisions to rely heavily on horse-drawn transport. Despite the Allies increasingly using fully motorized formations, a standard German infantry division at this time typically possessed only about 50 motor vehicles, supplemented by roughly 1,500 horse-drawn wagons, drawn by an estimated 4,000 to 6,000 horses. These animals required substantial daily sustenance, approximately 12 pounds of oats and 15 pounds of hay per horse, along with constant access to water. Under combat conditions, horses could cover no more than 15 to 20 miles in a day before requiring rest, meaning the effort of feeding and maintaining them placed a significant drain on resources that might otherwise support combat operations. A German supply column consisting of 40 wagons and a dozen assorted trucks could transport roughly 40 tons of supplies 20 kilometers over suitable roads. The operation demanded the upkeep of 160 horses, as well as maintenance of a variety of truck models for which common spare parts were largely unavailable due to Germany's fragmented industrial production. In contrast, American logistics achieved far greater efficiency. A single Red Bull Express convoy composed of 50 trucks could move around 125 tons of material over 200 kilometers in the same period. The resulting 10-to-1 advantage in logistical throughput provided U.S. forces with operational flexibility that German commanders could not hope to counter. German efforts to disrupt Red Bull Express operations produced minimal results. Initial fears that the Luftwaffe could severely damage convoys proved unfounded. By late 1944, Allied air superiority had rendered German air attacks largely ineffective. By September, Luftwaffe missions over France had become so infrequent that Red Bull convoys routinely moved without fighter escort and suffered negligible losses from aerial assault. Attempts at ground ambushes were equally unsuccessful. German units attempting to interdict convoys encountered well-trained American logistics personnel who defended themselves effectively. Truck drivers were armed and returned fire, military police provided automatic weapon support, and rapid reaction teams arrived swiftly with superior firepower. The few ambushes that succeeded highlighted to German commanders that attacking supply columns risked casualties far outweighing any potential gain. The primary challenges for Red Bull Express operations were not enemy action, but operational strain. Driver fatigue was a frequent cause of accidents, with some personnel reportedly falling asleep at the wheel, resulting in collisions or vehicles leaving the road. Mechanical failures temporarily reduced the number of operational trucks until maintenance crews could complete repairs. Continuous heavy traffic and weather conditions damaged roads, necessitating ongoing repair work to maintain mobility. Despite these hurdles, the Red Bull Express transported between 412,000 and 420,000 tons of supplies between August 25 and November 16, 1944, a figure representing over 1 million individual truckloads, each averaging roughly 250 miles over difficult terrain and under operational stress that would have crippled less robust logistics systems. As the Allies advanced, the Red Bull Express network expanded beyond its original routes. By September, multiple express corridors were active across France, each distinguished by unique markers but operating under the same principles established by the original system. Several specialized routes emerged. The White Bull Express transported supplies from Le Havre and Rouen to Paris beginning in early October. The Little Red Bull focused on high-priority materiel from Normandy to Paris. The Green Diamond Express delivered supplies from Normandy to inland railheads 100 miles away. The Red Lion Express supported the British 21st Army Group in Belgium, and these interconnected routes created a highly adaptable truck-based transportation network independent of rail infrastructure. When German counterattacks disrupted rail lines, trucks could quickly reroute. When ports became congested, supplies were seamlessly diverted to alternate paths. The system demonstrated resilience through both redundancy and operational flexibility. Red Bull Express operations officially concluded on November 16, 1944. By this time, French railways had been sufficiently repaired to resume standard supply movements. More importantly, the port of Antwerp, captured intact on September 4, had been cleared of German forces and fully opened for shipping by late November. The ability to sustain large-scale operations over hundreds of miles under continuous strain highlighted the transformative impact of American logistical planning in the European theater. The port facilities at Antwerp were capable of handling significantly larger volumes of cargo than the makeshift Normandy beaches or the temporary Mulberry harbors, which in turn allowed Allied supply lines to forward combat units to be dramatically shortened. As the Red Bull Express operation progressed and reached its final phases, the volume of cargo transported began to taper off. Deliveries that peaked at 12,342 tons on August 29 gradually fell to around 5,000 tons per day through October, and by early November, daily tonnage had declined further to approximately 2,700 tons. Correspondingly, the number of truck companies engaged in the operation diminished sharply. By mid-November, only 5 remained active on Red Ball routes, compared to a peak of 132 companies in early September. The operational demands imposed severe strain on both personnel and equipment. Maintenance logs reveal that the Red Ball trucks required major overhauls roughly every 30 days due to the intense pace of operations. Mechanical components wore down far more quickly than under normal usage conditions, and personnel suffered numerous injuries and casualties from accidents, fatigue, and occasional enemy contact. While exact casualty figures are incomplete due to the challenges of record-keeping under wartime pressure, estimates suggest that several hundred service members were affected. Despite these hardships, the strategic impact of the Red Ball Express outweighed the costs. The operation ensured that Allied forces could sustain relentless pressure on withdrawing German units during a period when a continuous pursuit might have ended the war in 1944. Although shortages of fuel necessitated temporary pauses in operations during September, the sustained logistical effort from August through early October inflicted irreparable losses on German forces and propelled the Allied armies to Germany's western border. Military historians continue to debate whether alternative logistics strategies might have allowed the Allies to breach the Siegfried Line before winter 1944. Central to these discussions is the question of fuel distribution. Some argue that concentrating resources on either Field Marshal Montgomery's northern thrust or General Patton's southern advance could have produced a decisive breakthrough, an opportunity the broad front strategy precluded. Nevertheless, such hypothetical scenarios risk overshadowing the remarkable achievement of the Red Ball Express itself, a supply network capable of supporting concurrent offensives across a 400-kilometer front while retaining operational flexibility to respond swiftly to shifting battlefield conditions. No prior army in history had maintained such an operational tempo over such distances solely using road transport. The racial composition of Red Ball units reflected the segregationist policies of the U.S. military at the time, yet simultaneously contradicted the assumptions underpinning those restrictions. African American soldiers, often relegated to non-combat service roles not because of capability but due to institutionalized discrimination, were integral to the operation's success. They proved their skill, bravery, and reliability under conditions as demanding as any faced by frontline troops. Many drove through contested territory, maintained composure under enemy fire, and operated with discipline despite exhaustion that would have overwhelmed less resolute individuals. General George Patton, notwithstanding his personal racial biases, recognized the critical importance of Red Ball's logistics, describing the 21 2-ton truck as our most valuable weapon. Similarly, Colonel John Eisenhower, son of Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower, asserted that the advance following the war, African American veterans of the Red Ball returned to a nation that continued to discriminate against them. Nonetheless, their exemplary service added weight to the push for military integration. Their performance in logistics and in combat positions some eventually occupied during the Battle of the Bulge helped reveal the irrationality of racial segregation. This experience informed President Harry Truman's 1948 executive order to desegregate the armed forces, which explicitly referenced evidence that segregation impeded military effectiveness. Red Ball drivers were acutely aware of the contradiction inherent in their service. They were sustaining armies fighting for freedom abroad while denied full citizenship rights at home. The dual struggle resonated with the broader Double V campaign championed by African American newspapers, emphasizing victory against both fascism overseas and racism domestically. Decades later, in September 1985, more than 500 surviving drivers and their families gathered in Alexandria, Virginia, to commemorate the 41st anniversary of the operation. Former Corporal Charles Johnson, who had coordinated traffic with the 783rd Military Police Battalion, highlighted the operation's historic significance. Over 83 days, Red Ball drivers transported more than 400,000 tons of vital supplies, ensuring continuous. The lessons learned from Red Ball influenced U.S. military supply strategies for years afterward. During the Korean War, similar but smaller-scale dedicated supply lines were established, and in Vietnam, logistical practices inspired by Red Ball were adapted to Southeast Asian conditions, as exemplified by Route 19 and interdiction efforts along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The operation's legacy endures as a testament to the critical role of logistics, the determination of its personnel, and the capacity of well-organized supply networks to shape the course of military campaigns. During the planning of Operation Desert Storm in 1991, U.S. military strategists carefully examined the logistics lessons of the Red Bull Express to design supply networks capable of supporting the rapid liberation of Kuwait. Today, American military doctrine places strong emphasis on adaptable, redundant, and resilient supply systems that can maintain intense operational tempo across multiple theaters. These principles trace directly to the experiences of World War II, particularly the Red Bull Express, which highlighted how large-scale, efficient logistics could decisively shape battlefield outcomes. The development of modern sustainment command structures, centralized logistics planning, and integrated joint operations stems from these wartime insights. General Dwight Eisenhower, in his post-war reflections, listed the 21 2-ton truck among the 6 most crucial tools that contributed to Allied victory in Europe, alongside the C-47 Dakota transport plane, the Jeep, the bazooka, the atomic bomb, and the bulldozer. This ranking, given by the Supreme Allied Commander who had first-hand exposure to all Allied military capabilities, underscores the centrality of logistics to operational success. Red Bull Express operations themselves were staggering in scale. For 83 consecutive days, convoys delivered an average of roughly 5,000 tons of supplies per day, a level of sustained performance that matches or surpasses many modern military supply chains. Over the course of the operation, approximately 412,000 tons of material were transported, enough to meet the complete logistical needs of 30 divisions for over 2 years, relying solely on trucks and road networks without rail assistance. The GMC CKW trucks that formed the backbone of these operations continued to serve long after the war, with many remaining in U.S. military use into the 1962. Surplus vehicles were distributed to Allied nations, some remaining operational into the 1992, and the truck's design influenced post-war American military vehicles, including the M35 series. The Red Bull Express vividly demonstrated that in mechanized warfare, the ability to sustain operations depends entirely on logistics capacity. Armies can only advance, fight, and hold ground at the pace their supply networks allow. Without ammunition, fuel, and food, combat units lose effectiveness regardless of battlefield skill. U.S. forces fully embraced this principle, establishing systems capable of maintaining continuous, high-intensity operations. German commanders, despite their intelligence on American industrial output, severely underestimated the effectiveness of U.S. logistics. Captured German officers consistently expressed amazement at the volume and speed of American resupply. The Germans assumed that the vast distances supplies had to traverse from American factories across the Atlantic and through liberated France would create exploitable vulnerabilities. In practice, however, U.S. logistics proved nearly unbreakable. Supplies consistently reached forward units faster than combat forces could consume them. Artillery units fired preparatory barrages at rates that would have depleted German stocks within hours. Tank formations advanced without the pauses for fuel that German doctrine predicted. Infantry assaults were reinforced by artillery and ammunition support unmatched by German forces, fundamentally reshaping defensive calculations. Every German operational doctrine relied on the assumption that attacking armies would eventually need to pause for resupply, providing opportunities for counterattacks. The American system, however, eliminated these pauses. The Red Bull Express and other transportation units ensured forward units had uninterrupted access to fuel and ammunition, creating a decisive operational advantage. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 exemplified Germany's final attempt to exploit a presumed weakness in American logistics. Hitler's Ardennes offensive sought to reach Antwerp, split Allied forces, and seize the port that sustained U.S. operations. He calculated that by cutting supply lines he could force a political or military crisis. The German advance stalled not because of direct combat alone but due to logistical shortcomings. Panzer divisions commenced operations with fuel for only 150 kilometers, anticipating that captured American fuel stocks would sustain them. U.S. transportation units, however, evacuated fuel depots ahead of the advance, denying Germans access to vital resources. Drivers working under extreme conditions displayed a level of courage and efficiency equivalent to combat troops, ensuring advancing German units found empty supply dumps rather than usable stockpiles. By December 19, only 5 days into the offensive, major German formations were already experiencing severe fuel shortages. The 2nd SS Panzer Division ground to a halt after crossing the Ourthe River, immobilized within sight of its objectives. The 1st SS Panzer Division abandoned numerous vehicles after exhausting its fuel reserves. Ammunition shortages appeared almost immediately. German artillery, reliant on horse-drawn supply convoys over icy roads, could not sustain the rapid tempo of attacks. Motorized German resupply units were insufficient to maintain pace, and critical shortages quickly became decisive. In contrast, American forces re-established disrupted supply lines within 48 hours, enabling artillery units to continue firing without limitation and stabilizing defensive positions. The Battle of the Bulge became the final demonstration of the logistical superiority that had defined the Western Front since Normandy, US. Forces operated without material restrictions while German units were forced to conduct operations under near-starvation conditions, making sustained offensives impossible. In conclusion, Red Ball Express operations provided a foundational lesson. Logistical capability is not merely a support function, it dictates the range, speed, and intensity of military action. The ability to move enormous volumes of supplies continuously and reliably allowed Allied forces to maintain operational momentum, shaping the outcome of campaigns and transforming the modern understanding of military logistics. Once American supply lines reached established defensive positions, the direction of the conflict became largely predetermined. Among the numerous logistical operations supporting Allied forces, the Red Ball Express stood out as a critical component, transporting more than 7 million tons of material to the European front from June 1944 through May 1945. This massive flow of supplies sustained 85 U.S. divisions along with their supporting units, ensured an uninterrupted stock of ammunition that shattered German defensive positions, kept fuel flowing for rapid mechanized advances that outpaced retreating enemy forces, and provided a secure operational foundation, allowing commanders to engage in combat without concern over potential supply failures undermining their plans. The German Wehrmacht never recovered from the devastating losses incurred during the Allied push across France. Divisions that had been decimated in Normandy or destroyed during the retreat back toward Germany were never restored to full effectiveness. Equipment losses surpassed the Reich's industrial capacity to replace them. Casualties in trained personnel could not be offset with soldiers of comparable skill or experience. More critically, the chronic logistical weaknesses that had plagued German operations throughout the conflict became insurmountable under the relentless pressure of Allied air dominance, which disrupted rail lines and created severe fuel shortages, leaving remaining motorized units immobile. Germany's reliance on horse-drawn logistics, a system already antiquated at the war's outset, proved catastrophically insufficient for the demands of modern mechanized warfare. The roughly 3 million horses employed by the German military during the war imposed a staggering burden. They consumed valuable resources, constrained operational speed, and introduced vulnerabilities that American forces exploited with devastating efficiency. Every ton of grain or fodder used to feed horses represented a ton unavailable for fuel or ammunition. Every delay forced upon units while waiting for horse-drawn vehicles to rest translated into slower reaction times against rapidly advancing mechanized forces. The stark contrast between American trucks and German horses encapsulated the decisive industrial gap that determined the outcome of the war. U.S. factories churned out standardized vehicles in staggering numbers, while German industry struggled to maintain production of varied vehicle models using increasingly scarce materials and coerced labor, which could not replicate the productivity of a free workforce. By the war's conclusion in May 1945, American forces in Europe had operated the most advanced military logistics system ever assembled. This system had enabled the largest amphibious invasion in history, supported the swiftest continuous advance in modern warfare, absorbed setbacks during the Battle of the Bulge, and successfully positioned Allied armies at the Elbe River on schedule. The Red Ball Express represented a single component of this vast network, yet its symbolic weight far exceeded the volume of supplies it carried. Those trucks, emblazoned with red circles and crisscrossing French roads in autumn 1944, manned by weary soldiers driving relentless missions, became a tangible emblem of American logistical superiority. They embodied the industrial strength of the United States. They demonstrated that well-organized supply chains could determine the outcome of wars as decisively as battlefield victories. They illustrated that determination, coordination, and resourcefulness could overcome almost any operational challenge. Columns of Red Ball Express trucks rolling through France were visible evidence of this dominance. Their numbers could be counted, but their momentum could not be halted. Many of the drivers were young African-American soldiers confronting discrimination even as they played an indispensable role in securing victory, proving their contribution to the Allied war effort was both historic and invaluable. During World War II, the movement of troops and the success of frontline operations depended as much on the invisible hand of logistics as on combat prowess. Supply lines kept forces advancing when natural limits or resource shortages might have forced them to halt. Essential supplies, ammunition, fuel, food, and maintenance parts were transported to the front with tireless precision, enabling continuous firepower, mechanized assaults, and sustained troop operations. In effect, the logistical network shaped the outcomes of battles just as decisively as the infantry charging beaches, tank units breaching fortified lines, or airborne divisions holding strategic positions under fire. The Red Ball Express exemplified this principle in practice. By ensuring that trucks delivered thousands of tons of material daily through the French countryside, it allowed Allied forces to operate without pause. The contrast was stark. Elite German units frequently found themselves immobilized, unable to advance due to fuel shortages, whereas American supply efforts transformed logistical potential into operational reality. The program offered a concrete demonstration that the ability to maintain momentum in modern warfare rested on the capacity to keep soldiers equipped, fed, and mobile. Over an intense 83-day period in 1944, the Red Ball Express delivered roughly 412,000 tons of essential materials. This effort consumed around 50,000 tires and demanded extreme endurance from the young drivers who worked under grueling conditions, often pushing beyond safe limits to ensure the front lines never ran short. Their relentless work underscored a critical lesson. The outcome of war in the industrial age is determined as much by production and supply as by battlefield heroics. The scale of American industrial capacity, combined with organizational innovation, proved far superior to German expectations, challenging assumptions about U.S. limitations and demonstrating the strategic weight of logistical competence. The creation of this supply system was unanticipated by the U.S. military at the war's outset, but necessity spurred a remarkable response. American engineers, planners, and soldiers devised a transport network capable of delivering enormous quantities of material quickly and reliably. In doing so, they set a new standard for military logistics. The Red Ball Express showed that victory depended not only on the manufacture of weapons but also on the ability to get those weapons to the units that needed them faster than any adversary could react. While history often highlights dramatic moments, the storming of Normandy, the liberation of Paris, the crossing of the Rhine, these events were underpinned by the quiet, relentless work of supply operations. The Red Ball Express operated day and night, a rolling testament to industrial and organizational prowess, proving that the real edge in modern warfare extends beyond production lines into the systems that connect factories to the front. This logistical ingenuity became as iconic in its own right as any battlefield maneuver, cementing the notion that trucks carrying supplies could be as pivotal to victory as tanks or artillery. Ultimately, the Red Ball Express was more than a supply operation. It was a symbol of American strategic advantage. It demonstrated that a nation's true strength in war lies not solely in the weapons it produces, but in its ability to deploy them effectively where and when they are needed. By doing so, it changed military thinking forever, ensuring that Allied forces maintained an unbroken tempo that hastened the end of the conflict in Europe. In short, the drivers, planners, and industrial workers behind this network were as critical to victory as any soldier on the battlefield.